When it comes to plant-to-take substrates, there are so many options to choose from. There's the nutrient-rich stuff like organic soils, aqua soils, versus the inert, nutrient-free substrates like gravel and sand. So what do? Here are 5 things, well, more like 20 things I wish I had known about plant-to-take substrates. Hi, my name is Irene with girltalksfish, here with practical tips on nanofish and planted aquariums. And my category number 1 is how to save money on substrate. The fact of the matter is, aqua soils are expensive, especially if you're trying to fill, 3 inches of substrate and then you have a really large tank. That can be out of your budget in some cases. So my first tip would be you don't have to go with a specialty aqua soil. Those aqua soils contain a lot of nutrients in it. So A, that can be bad if it releases a lot of ammonia into the water, and that would be bad for your fish. And then B, the excess nutrients in the water are just, if you combine that with high light, guaranteed to give you algae. So don't forget in the very beginning, if you're using an aqua soil, do like daily water changes. You really want to minimize those nutrients in the water column. And I find that to be true even with some inert substrates. So for example, Carib Sea Eco Complete, the inert substrate actually comes soaking in a liquid fertilizer, and I have found that when I put the Eco Complete in there, it's wise to do daily water changes to get out the excess fertilizer. Another way to save money would be to layer your more expensive substrate on the very bottom and then cap it off with a cheaper substrate on the top layer. I know someone like MD Fish Tanks, he likes to actually, for his base layer, mix in aqua soil, gravel, and sand together, so it's not even pure aqua soil. He puts that on the base layer, and then on the bottom he sprinkles some sand that's a lot prettier on top. Finally, if your aquascape is such that you only have plants in certain areas of the aquarium, you could only put aquascape directly underneath where the plants are, and then not underneath where, let's say, your large rock or pieces of hardscape are, where there are clearly no plants there and they wouldn't benefit from the aqua soil. Category number 2 is on sand, which I have a whole video about over here, so I'm not going to go into a ton of details, but a lot of people want to use it because it's cheap, it's inert, but it can still grow plants. So my first piece of advice would be don't use fine grain sand, the ones with the really, really small particles. The plants tend to not like it as much. The roots can't spread as easily into it. So Bentley Pascoe left me a tip back in the day where he recommended putting a thin layer of gravel or pebbles or even crushed up lava rock, which you can get from a hydroponics shop, on the bottom layer, and then you can put your pretty sand on top. But that will leave room for the roots to really spread out and grow because those larger pebbles have gaps in between, perfect for the roots to grow into. I used to use a coarser, just black generic sand that I got from Petco PetSmart, and it looked really, really nice, but you can see I converted my tank away from it because I found that even though it was a coarser sand, it still seemed to trap mulm above it, and the mulm never really got down below it. And mulm, by the way, is just kind of detritus, rotting organics that are in your aquarium that have kind of turned into a tannish fluff. And every time the fish would just swim through it, it would just waft up into the water column, make it look really cloudy and not very pretty. Versus ever since I switched to more of a gravel like Eco Complete, because of those larger cracks in between, I feel like the mulm gets a chance to really sink down in it. So that A, looks better, but B, it really benefits the plants. So now they can take advantage of that mulm, which is kind of like aquarium compost in a way, very nutritious. Since I primarily use inert substrates, the next category I want to talk about is root tabs. Now, a lot of people want to go kind of the DIY route with root tabs or buy terrestrial plant root tabs because they're a lot cheaper, but just be very, very careful when you're using them because they tend to contain ammonia in them. And if that ammonia ever gets disturbed because you're planting a new plant or you've got fish that dig around, though that ammonia will leak into your water and definitely cause you a world of hurt when it comes to your fish. So just be very, very careful if you're going to go that route. The second tip is a lot of people, if you're using a dirted substrate, after several years, those nutrients eventually get all used up by the plants, right? So I've never tried this, but Corey from Aquarium Co-op recommends you can freeze chunks of organic soil actually, and then put them back into the substrate to remineralize that soil. So I thought that was kind of a clever trick. Me personally, I just want to play it safe. So I buy aquarium safe root tabs made by aquarium companies, and a lot of times they come with a gel capsule, which will dissolve rather quickly in the water. So you want to put that into the substrate as quickly as possible. But even if it does melt and a little bit of the nutrients gets into the water, it's fine because they make it to be safe for things like your animals, your shrimp, etc. Now, one thing about these gel capsules is it usually has a little bit of air trapped into it. And so if you put it into the substrate, a lot of times it'll pop out and then float to the top, which is kind of annoying. So I like to take my tweezers over here and I'll put them into the substrate at a 45-degree angle, or I'll put it directly underneath a plant at an angle, and then it seems to prevent it from popping out. Finally, since I'm using an inert substrate, I don't really follow the instructions exactly where it says, put your root tabs every 4 to 6 inches apart every 3 to 4 months. Well, for me, I know cryptocorynes like root tabs, and I'm really trying to pump up their growth ever since they melted on me. Long story, not gonna get into it, but I will actually put a root tab underneath each of them, or underneath each group of them, every single month. Or if I have like a heavy root feeder plant and it's starting to look kind of wilty, not gonna wait for my 3 to 4 months, I'm just gonna put another root tab underneath there until it perks up again. Final category is planting tricks. So first thing is I wish somebody had told me that different aquarium plants need to be planted into the substrate different ways. So I need to do a video about this, and I haven't yet, but you can see my blog post about it here. But basically, some plants like a bulb plant or rhizome, you're not supposed to bury in the substrate, versus other plants like stem plants, you're supposed to plunge in as deeply as possible. So it can be a little confusing. Make sure to do your research on that. Another common complaint I see is that when I try to plant my plants into the substrate, they keep floating away. So Clueless Morgan said, yeah, I'm using tweezers, I put my plant down, and then when I take my tweezers out, 75% of the time, the plant floats away. Ah! So you can use that trick with the root tabs. With plants, you can try to plant the plant at a 45-degree angle, and yes, it'll point out funny, but eventually, because of the light it's trying to reach, it will grow vertically and will look fine. Another trick I used to use would be use 2 tweezers. So one pair of tweezers plants the plant in. Once it's in all the way as far as you want to go, you grab the base of the plant with your second pair of tweezers, and then you can lift out your first pair without disturbing the substrate and unplanting your plant. Nowadays, a lot of times I just use my hands to plant the plants because I have a lot more dexterity and control, but it does sometimes make a little bit more of a mess with the substrate. Now for carpeting plants that have really tiny, weak roots, really easy to float away, you often see people individually planting those carpeting plants, and then they really will just float away at the slightest waft of a fish swimming by, or if you're doing a water change. So what Corey from Aquarium Co-op recommends is actually putting the whole basket and the rock wool into the substrate, and that way it's already anchored in there, and then let that carpeting plant grow out from the rock wool and it will cover it. Or MD Fish Tanks did something similar where he took his Monte Carlo, he took a small flat stone and then wrapped sewing thread around it. He knotted it on the bottom, and then to make sure the sewing thread doesn't move around, he put a little dab of glue and a piece of paper towel, and then he placed that stone and kind of wedged it lightly into the substrate, again, letting that Monte Carlo grow out and spread into the substrate from there. So the key is anchor it to something first. If you like these planted tank tips and tricks, I've got a whole playlist over here about 5 things I wish I'd known about lighting, fighting algae, etc. And also last week, some of you guys asked me for my bubble tea recipe. So I'm gonna go ahead and link to the recipe video I made for my second channel over here. Take time to enjoy your aquariums, and I'll see you in the next video.